First and foremost, the estates that were listed by the records of Lagos State do not have any layout approval.
I went through the list. I saw some estates that ordinarily I would not describe them as estates. Yes, on their name they carry whatever estate, but I know their history and I know that this started off as gated community.
So in the eyes of the government, these estates haven't gone through the requisite approvals in ensuring that everybody conforms with what is sustainable, what actually is habitable, and in their own eyes, what is beneficial for its own citizens. So the layout approval essentially guides the use of land within an estate. You see, this particular time where people would complain that in our estate, for example, this particular area was earmarked for green, and then developer all of a sudden is building on it or stuff like that. When you have a layout approval, whatever it is that is built, for example, on a recreational ground, can be demolished. That's what a layout approval is supposed to protect. It actually is more or less protecting the interest of the people who are supposed to use that particular environment.
For developers and people who may have bought into these estates, what does this mean for them?
So it's in the notice itself. I mean, what the government has said is that they'll seal off those estates. They'll be very surprised as to what the government can do to put an inconvenience to the habitation, currently being enjoyed. Some people don't even bother with approval, as long as it's beautiful. But it goes beyond that. You see estates, for example, my gas has failed, my MacBook has finished though. You literally can pass something to the next person because people don't follow these things. A lot of people will just develop and they'll say, we will tackle these issues as it goes. When they come, we will settle them. And this may be also due to the ignorance of some people. So for those who are kind of like caught in this web, I'm sure, the directive is approach the agency.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Square Meter Stories. This is the podcast where we break down events, happenings, and issues one square meter at a time in the real estate sector. Now, recently, the Lagos State government released a list, 176 estates that they say are illegal. And they're asking these estates to come forward with their layouts and other plans. Now, this has caused a panic in the industry, with many people saying it's just a revenue drive. So today we want to delve deeply into this issue and allay the fears of many people who are currently panicking, especially if you bought into one of those estates. And to discuss this issue with me today is none other than the founder of the Detail Apartments, architect Olamide.
Always a pleasure to be on set.
So here we are once again.
Having you on, and discussing very, very germane issues, in the real estate space. So nice to be here.
Now, first and foremost,
yes.
Yesterday, as this news broke,
it was actually on Monday.
It was on Monday.
2 days ago.
2 days ago. But yesterday seemed to be when it really disseminated.
It caught fire.
It caught fire yesterday.
Yes.
I had no less than 5 calls and messages from our subscribers in the diaspora, and the question was, what's happening in Lagos? What's happening in Lagos? And for us as a real estate company, all I simply had to do was just send them the list and say, listen, check. None of our estate developments are listed there because we go through the right process. But for many of them, they are not only invested with us.
That's correct.
They are invested in some of these estates that are listed.
Very correct.
The big question is, and I still, in fact, when I first heard this, my mindset was, what makes an estate illegal? Okay, they didn't submit their layout because that's what the government is asking for. Come forward with your layout plans and let's verify.
Yes.
The second thing I looked at was the list of the estates. And I went through the list. I saw some estates that ordinarily I would not describe them as estates. Yes, on their name they carry whatever estate, but I know their history. And I know that this started off as gated communities. Right. Let me not use the term estate because when you say estate, you're talking about there's a level of organization, a level of ownership.
Yes.
But they started out as gated communities. So residents within that community decided, for improved security, let's have a gatehouse, less man security posts. They came together, did their roads, did their drainages, and stuff of that nature. And now they are being termed illegal estates. So I guess the first question is, from the government's perspective, what makes an estate illegal?
Okay, so we can attack this very question in many dimensions. And first and foremost, to our many viewers and for those who may eventually see this video, the concern is very genuine, for an investor. You wake up one day and an estate you have already subscribed into. And then for some of those estates that people are already inhabiting, you see this kind of a thing. And with all that's been going on in Lagos, you see something and then you hear the word illegal. People start to, panic, and very rightfully so. So an estate can be termed illegal in many dimensions. And, there are always a set of rules, there are policies, there are things that guide development, in any given environment. So in Lagos State itself, it has its own peculiar set of rules, and there are many things that developers and homeowners who wish to also develop their properties must comply with. In this case, what makes them tag the estate as illegal is that they have not actually complied with a certain regulation that should have been complied with, which is in this case, the issuance of a layout approval. Now, there are many approvals when it comes to development. So there's the building plan approval. There's also the layout approval. Now, the building plan approval is specific to the authorization you get from the right agency, which is Lagos State Physical Planning Permit Authority, to erect a structure. The layout approval now refers to when the land itself on which whatever development that is supposed to be done, the land has to go through what you call a layout approval. And so you ask, okay, what's the layout approval? First and foremost, the estates that were listed by the records of Lagos State do not have any layout approval. And layout approval essentially would be how estates are guided, as to how to develop those portions of land within the estate. And then they only affect certain sizes of estates. Ideally, anything above 10,000 square meters in size should undergo a layout approval.
Okay.
Should undergo it, right? So those estates in questions are estates that are enormous, they are immense, and they already have developments in them, and they don't have layout approval. So the layout approval essentially guides the use of land within an estate. So whether be it some estates that you can aggregate together to now call maybe a gated community, what that land is in the eyes of the government is, okay, it is probably as a block, it is seen as a block of which several people have taken ownership. But with the government itself, the land, for example, may be under one unit. Like, so when you say you have like a global C of O, and people now decide to take several positions within that. But the estate itself, the entity itself, with its size, should be properly planned. And in line with Baweji Sonlo's theme agenda, creating a modern, eco-friendly city, right? A 21st century city, or 21st century city, as he calls it, is very mindful of how estates are developed so that the whole thing isn't chaotic. So in the eyes of the government, these estates haven't gone through the requisite approvals in ensuring that everybody conforms with what is sustainable, what actually is habitable, and in their own eyes, what is beneficial for its own citizens.
So what you're saying, if I get you right, is that this is not like something the government is just pulling out of thin air.
No, absolutely not.
It's a standard requirement that ought to have been followed.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Now, the next question I would ask is that some of these illegal estates have been in existence for decades.
For quite a while,
yes.
yes.
Some of them have been in existence for, because there are names there that I'm like, nah.
I know there are some estates there that have been in existence since at least 2015. So you're right when you say a decade at least.
Yeah, because there are some estates I saw on that list and I was like, nah, you can't tell me that. You can't tell me that regarding those. I'm talking about the ones that are so well planned out. You go into those estates, they have their play areas, their gardens, and they have some of the biggest HNIs in the country living in there.
Correct.
So in my mind, I just couldn't fathom.
Okay.
How can you say that these guys never submitted a layout?
So let me pick it up from there. You see, this particular time where people would complain that in our estate, for example, this particular area was earmarked for green, and then developer all of a sudden is building on it or stuff like that. That's what a layout approval is supposed to protect. It actually is more or less in favor or protecting the interest, let me use that word now, of the residents or people who are supposed to use that particular environment, those who are to reside there, how well the environment serves them, and protecting the manner in which the environment is supposed to be structured. So, say for example, there's a particular expanse of land that is to be developed. Now, a layout is done for the estate. And depending on the size of the land itself, certain areas are designated for certain uses. Of course, if it's supposed to be residential estate, a majority, a high percentage will be allocated for residential uses. And then you have the commercial use, the mixed use and things like that. The recreational area, all those things are well mapped out. And even depending on the size of the estate, you could also have institutional uses, schools, creches. After all, you've seen some estates where you have schools right within them that are so massive. And the reason is very simple, is that you want to make that environment self-sustaining. How does it sustain itself? You can't expect an estate that's that big to have everywhere built up as residences. Where people shop? Where people go to worship? Where people go to school? And other uses like that. So when this layout is approved, and the government says they are fine with it because they guide you just like building plan approvals. You can't just submit nonsense and say you want to build this. It goes through scrutiny. There are checks and all of that. And so there are professionals on the other end of the agency that check and say, okay, you have put everything in the right use, or we advise you change this, you change that. When you then conform with their own standards, they approve and say, go ahead and build this. So in that same manner, the layout has to be approved so that the uses are well defined, and then they hold you accountable to it. Now, in the future, when the developer now decides to say, well, I see that things are really picking up and I want to make more money, then let me now build and develop these areas. People cry foul, and then they have nothing to hold the developer accountable to. It was earmarked as a recreational area. But when you have a layout approval, whatever it is that is built, for example, on a recreational ground, can be demolished. The estate itself can have buildings that have been certified for development. You can have your approvals and everything, but if you go build somewhere else, you would be earmarked for contravention, and that structure can be pulled down. So in essence, estates that have long been in existence but didn't have this, those regulatory what's it called now? The regulatory purposes for which an estate is supposed to be kept sane, the sanctity of an estate is loose, and then some developers could also run wild. Now the inhabitants or people who have already invested start to panic and say, you're not supposed to do this, but there's nothing that you can legally hold that guy accountable to. But you can now go to the government and say, this was earmarked for this, is in the layout approval, you cannot change this use. So it's holding people accountable, which is in line with Babajide Sanwo-Olu's own agenda, is to develop cities that are self-sustaining and also very future-focused.
Yeah. Now, which brings me to something I want to ask. Yes. A typical layout plan, I believe the government has its regulations in terms of what they expect to see in a layout. Like, I think I remember reading once that in a proper layout, at least 2% of the estate is to be dedicated to greenery. Okay. If I'm not mistaken. What other kind of regulations does a typical layout need to have before you get before the government can say, yeah, you can go ahead with this?
So you have a department called the Department of Development Matters with the Lagos State Fiscal Planning Permit Authority. At least that much I know. That is in charge, of scrutinizing and advising developers or people, entities that wish to develop large tracts of land. So the specifics of which are not really public. I don't have that information, but I do know that they allocate percentages to each of these uses. So, and it would also depend on the size of the land, okay? And then different sizes of lands also would mandate certain uses that may not be found in smaller tracts. For example, if you have a land, say, that measures 3 hectares, which is 30,000 square meters, okay? That's about 45 plots, right?
Yeah.
So on 45 plots, they may not necessarily mandate a place of worship or maybe a school, an institutional use. But if you have an estate that measures 10 hectares, you may very well find some uses that may be enforced and say, no, you must provide this, you must provide that, because within that ecosystem itself, what actually will make it self-sustainable. And so they want that. So the percentages, I'm sure, would be based on the size of the land. The uses also allocated would be based on the size of the land. So in approaching the right agency, which is LASPA, you will draw out a layout, or they may also give you guidelines, because you make an application. The thing about construction, what a lot of people don't know about is, before you even do anything at all, you will seek what they call planning information. And planning information essentially tells you everything it is that you have to be mindful of. So it's a set of regulations that while doing your designs, of course, they won't put you in a box and say, do this, this is how it must be done. But those guidelines guide you as to how you now creatively package something that would make a lot of sense to those who you are targeting it for. And then you design with that.
All right.
So hope I clarified that question.
Yeah, okay, that's
exactly.
Good. So for developers and people who may have bought into these estates, what does this mean for them?
What it means for them is that I would say compliance, I think is the order of the day. And I think it's the agenda by this government, because if we are to make the progress that we want, and sometimes it may be painful, the kind of ways in which this progress must be made, it is that how can they reel in, the many, I will call it maybe not so good practices. I don't want to say bad practices, but maybe not so good practices. And this may be also due to the ignorance of some people, and they say, oh no, we can just do whatever, as long as it's beautiful. But it goes beyond that, So for those who are kind of like caught in this web, I'm sure, the directive is approach the agency within 21 days for your layout approval. So what people don't get, so the word illegal is triggering so much, I would say, visceral kind of reactions, and people's properties are safe. Get this very clear.
All right.
As long as the title is not in dispute, it's not like the government wants to come and grab your land. They are not after that kind of agenda, but they want to regulate how development is done and also hold to account people who are very wildly contravening what should be ideological things that they should do. You see estates, for example, you could literally pass a handkerchief or a matchbox or a lighter. My gas has failed, my matchbox has finished though. You literally can pass something to the next person because people don't follow these things. And also the conversion of certain uses, for commercial gain by certain developers. All those things, they want to reel it in. And everything is all just targeted at the well-being of citizens. Okay, so for those that have been tagged illegal, once again, it is for them to approach right agencies, and then they can also begin to assess what has been done. In many cases, I don't know what the aftermath will be, and how much level of scrutiny that will go into this. But one thing I know for sure is that with this move, the state government is a lot more deliberate about how people develop properties.
Yeah.
And you see, so a lot may not be possible, about what has been done in the past, because you can't go demolishing people who have been living in places for years, some of these estates in existence for at least a decade. You may not be able to do so much with that. But how do you take it going forward? So I think that is more like the future focus of this administration, and how compliance, is the new currency, so to speak.
Okay, so basically we are saying that for those who are already there, they are not under threat of having their buildings or properties demolished.
Okay, so I can't go on record to say...
because that is the major fear.
Let me say one thing straight. Properties can't just be demolished that way. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier on. It is to try to reel in the many not so good practices, right, that people have become accustomed to. And again, to safeguard people's well-being and their investments. For those who have already invested right now, it also is raising the awareness of people as to what to ask developers, okay? And how even with existing developments, how people can start to scrutinize and to also whistleblow, when things aren't going so well.
Yes.
For those who already have developments that are being inhabited, it is not a cause for panic. I'll tell you that for free. It's not a cause for panic, because I know even within the law, there would be room, for such, I would say, scrutiny, negotiations, or, in ways where regularizations, okay, if this has been done, in some cases, the estate would have to probably look at how it takes development going forward, particularly for estates that still have properties or lands that haven't yet been developed. Okay. Sometimes the government may, I don't know what the outcome would be, because I don't know what the plan is. But what I'm saying in essence is that people's investments are safe to a very large extent, but some developers may have to reorganize how they approach development.
Going forward.
Yes.
Now, this is the other key point I wanted us to look into.
Yes.
Now, for estates that are not so organized,
yep.
Remember I said at the beginning that some of them, I know them to just be gated communities. Like,
that's correct.
People are already living there. They decided to come together, do their drainages, do their roads, put security, gatehouse, and all of that stuff, and call themselves an estate.
That's correct.
Now, that entire expanse where those people live, nobody has ownership of it. Like an entity that you say, this entity should be responsible to go submit a layout.
Yes.
In those kind of situations, who is going to submit a layout? Because they don't even have a layout per se. They may not even have a layout anyways. Who is going to be responsible for submitting a layout to the government in those kind of instances?
Okay, so I think whenever there is a situation like this that affects a group of people, they would be compelled, to form a structure as to how to go about a problem. Okay, so nobody would sit and say it doesn't concern us because we are different units. But if a particular cluster has been identified and the government is pointing a torch to say, hey, there may be a problem here, then everything has a root, doesn't it? Before it became gated community, it was one large tract that fell under one probably Gazette or C of O. It had one root title that covered a certain area. And so those people would have to band together to see how that can be solved. For example, when the Honorable Commissioner for Environment, Honorable Tokunbo Wahab, went through some certain areas in this Etiosa axis and had these issues regarding drainage and maybe structures that should be pulled down or rights of ways that must be maintained.
Yes.
People came together, okay? Because it was, okay, this is a certain path through which drainage must go and must go this way. So it affects this person, it affects this person, it affects the community. They had to come together. So what I'm saying in essence, and why I made reference to that, is that whenever you have situations where it affects a group of people, they will come together to see how this solution can be arrived at, and then they can get past, the entire problem.
And for estates that are not able to comply within 21 days, any idea what the consequences might be?
So it's in the notice itself. I mean, what the government has said is that they'll seal off those estates. And so if you are not trying to comply, because of course the government can't go and start it, this is not a demolition drive. It's not. It's a compliance drive, okay? And so for people that do not heed to the notice, they will be very surprised as to what the government can do to put an inconvenience to the inhabitation, currently being enjoyed. I mean, if you come there and then they seal up and they have done that for some estates in the past, where they seal up the entrance, and then they get your attention and they must come to the table. But nothing that will be malicious, to probably put at risk the investment of people.
Aside from
I see that as maybe a direction.
Aside from the ceiling, do you see a situation where the government might say, because, something of this sort was done in Lekki, I think last year or thereabouts, where some sections of Lekki Phase 1, the residents were putting up gates and security and different, and then the government said no, these are supposed to, they took it down. So for these ones that are not proper estates, for instance, say it might take them time to band together, as you have said, and
It doesn't
comply with
take
the
it doesn't
government.
take time to band together. Trust me. What I'm saying in essence is this: is that when you see the very long arm of the law swinging in your direction,
You move fast.
people would move fast. I can guarantee that it doesn't take long for people to band together, particularly when something is of a common interest.
Especially considering that most of these so-called estates that I'm calling gated communities
Yes.
already have like a leadership structure.
They do.
Yeah,
Most
they
of
have a
them
leadership
they do.
structure.
They do.
No, because they have their residents
Without calling
association,
names, I mean,
landlords association.
some of those names that we went through
Yeah.
before we came on set, right? They actually do have more or less like a governance structure, or
Yes.
maybe some sort of structure that
Yes.
represents the interest of the larger cluster itself. So
Okay.
it's not a difficult thing for people to come together.
So could there be a case where the government says, you know what, you guys are unable to comply, take down this security house, don't call it an estate, let it just be open, you understand, and we know that, okay, it's not supposed to be organized like an estate.
Let me just put it this way. Yeah, we shouldn't speculate, because the idea behind what we're trying to do, right, is not to put fear in the minds of people, but just to say, you know what, this is what is coming and this is how you should prepare for it. Because in essence, like I said, what I see as the direction of this notice is how we comply, and going forward, how the state itself continues to develop in a manner that aligns with the forward-thinking direction of the administration.
Okay. Now, of course, when things like this happen, people tend to take advantage of it. So in terms of property prices,
Yes.
do you see this move by the government as leading to an increase in property prices, where people say, since I have to get layout approval, that's an extra cost, so my property prices have to reflect that? Do you see a situation like that happening?
I would say, yeah, it has some very loose ties with this with the value of properties, and I'll explain what I think is that. So compliance means stricter regulations, okay, and people are abiding by stricter rules, which means, for example, if you do a layout and the layout says you allot a certain percentage to residential uses and then other uses such as commercial, mixed use, you could even have an estate so big that it can also allot space for a petrol station, a filling station, but it will be zoned to a section where it is safe and all of that, And the idea basically is that what it does is to help the developer, or it forces the developer to really prioritize, how can I make this money back? And so in cases where the drive would have been to overdevelop for residential uses, there are certain things that, for example, a green area, you can't commercialize that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe for the use of the residents, maybe they want to do parties and such, you charge maybe a fee for renting and everything like that. But you cannot place a commercial value on an area that is supposed to be for the common good of the inhabitants. And so that money, for example, that say the developer now would have been able to use to bring prices down or spread the cost of that to make the prices more affordable for people to buy, definitely would be imposed on the units that he's selling. It's just that something gives, right? There's an opportunity cost. If I can't develop here, then I must price it a bit more. Then also the cost of the layout approval, because it doesn't come cheap. And maybe that's why some people who have developed know that they are supposed to do this. But the time invested in getting layout approval, and again, I would say if the government gets it right, and let me just digress a little bit, and the processing of these things, and such that they put a risk on the capital being deployed for projects with the high rate of inflation, so many things tied together, because you are putting in for a layout approval. You get a layout approval, you put in for a building plan approval. You get the approval, you now have to process your authorization to commence construction before you actually start. So much has passed in between. And then maybe your cost projection, and your by analysis, you're supposed to make this. And there's a cost to the capital that you have already secured for the project. Yes. Everything is counting. And ideally you can't break ground on construction without getting all these approvals. So if the entire process was a bit more seamless, and then there was a time that you could attach to it in such a manner that you can predict that if I start this process now, maybe in another 3 weeks, I'm done. As long as I comply with all the rules and the process is that seamless,
It becomes
then
easy to
people will be
plan.
more compliant. Then it's not be an issue of how do I charge the cost of the layout approval to the people who are going to buy. So in essence, you can see how all these things are tied in certain price adjustments, for properties going forward. So when this compliance really hits and then it is fully executed, it may have some impact on the price of properties going
So,
forward.
do you see this as a very necessary move? I mean, with your vast experience in the industry, we've seen all kinds of things in this industry.
Right.
And definitely there has to be more regulation.
Correct.
But this particular move at this time, do you
Yes.
see it as being very necessary?
Absolutely so. I would say, again, credit to what the governor is trying to do, in as much, like I said earlier, some kind of things that would make it possible to achieve certain agendas may be painful, but sometimes you go through pain to achieve that. And I say this very humbly, not because maybe our properties aren't affected, right? Because we try to comply as much as we can, but just because to achieve certain objectives, you must go through some paths that appear to be punitive in nature, appear to be inconsiderate in nature, but the objective itself, again, by the agenda of the government, he has an agenda themes, right? He also is very focused on a 21st century city. And for you to be able to achieve that, you have to put all the structures or enforce these structures that were not previously being added to. You have to enforce them and drive that towards the goal of the administration.
So, for developers, would you say the process to getting these layout approvals,
Yes.
is it clear, is it transparent, or is it something that until you dip your feet into the water, you don't know how deep it goes?
It's clear, it's transparent. Again, I said something. You want to develop anything, you seek guidance. Okay, a lot of people would I buy this land and then I give it to somebody to design and then I just hit the ground. Some people don't even bother with approval. Some people, and you know this for a fact, you're in this
Yes,
space.
definitely.
Some people don't bother with approvals. I get the land and I will sort whatever is the problem along the way. And of course, for investors, and that's why part of why we do this, what we do is to educate people more. And again, all these things that are happening, everybody's a lot more aware. The average buyer is a lot more sophisticated
Yes,
now.
yes.
A lot of people who buy our properties, you'll be surprised the kind of questions they're asking us.
Yeah.
And because that level of transparency, we go through all compliance checks. We avail them information. So at the end of the day, it is how do people become a lot more aware? The developers will get this planning information and it guides them on what they can do or how they can actually find ways. A set of rules is how is made for you to take advantage of what is there. So I don't see rules, so to speak, as this is how I'm restricted. Sometimes it forces you to think as to how can I maximize and how can I stay within on the right side of the law while trying to meet my own commercial objective, which is to make profit.
Yeah. So the next thing you need to also talk about is going forward.
Yes, please.
How does the government ensure compliance? Because Lagos, though small, is vast. In terms of construction,
Correct.
in nooks and crannies,
Yes.
all kinds of construction development is going on. People are building. But how does the government begin to ensure compliance? How do they keep up pace with the level of work going on in terms of developers building to ensure that there's compliance so that in the future you don't have cases like this? Because yes, this has been, how we do in Nigeria. When things go so bad, and like I always tell my clients, listen, it's better to be on the right side of the law because you could be having your way for 30 years.
Yes.
And then somebody comes with the right mindset and says, no, we need to do it right. And then you are caught flat-footed.
Correct.
But going forward, how does the government ensure compliance with these regulations in every nook and cranny of the estate?
I'll say they have the right structures, and what is needed is just enforcement. Okay. The government has all these things that are happening right now, even with this latest development about illegality of some estates. All these things are new. Why people are panicking is because they are coming into the knowing of this for the first time. Before now it was building plan approval, building plan approval. Now it has to be layout approval.
That was even recent. The building plan was even, before now it was just what title.
What title? What so it has been evolving. It has really been evolving. But I would say all these things have been there from the onset, and it is for the government to continue to sensitize. Before you try to seek for compliance, I think the path is through sensitization. How can they continue to make people more aware? I think in the age of IT and the internet, it becomes a lot easier for them to disseminate information. Look at how this notice went viral.
Yeah.
I mean, before the internet and things like that, you put out a notice on newspaper, it is very hard for that to circulate. And some of these things, in all fairness to the government, they may have issued notices before now. You'll be surprised if some people dig up information and say, this thing has been issued before now. But I think we're in an age where information goes as fast and it spreads like wildfire. In just 2 days, everybody knows that. But a number of people have sent this thing to me too. I'm like, people that have not said hello, hi in a long time, but of course they've been following our developments and things like that. They say, oh, this, and I'm like, no, we're covered. You get my point. So it is that they must begin with massive, and they must sustain massive sensitization. Then you can now enforce compliance. They have structures. They have officers who continue to go out there to ask, where is this information? Where is this? Where is this? Where is this? What is this? What permit do you have? Show us. They will come to several your site, and if you have it, go to their. Recently, at our new project, Zen Oasis, where all our papers are in order, even to our state certification certificates, right? But we had LABCA visit from the district office, and they came, they marked the place. And they said, oh, the reason we are marking is because we have not seen your information. Meanwhile, it was at headquarters, the approval was issued. So we just merely took our papers the next day. And they said, oh, apologies, you have everything, and they put it on file. So it is, they can approach every time. So they have officers all around. I'm just trying to say, what I made reference to is that they have people roaming the streets, and they would come to you. So sensitization is key, compliance, they have everything in check. And I think they just must continue to be seen as helping move the agenda or their agenda, for the benefits. Because some of the things I shared is why a layout approval is important. People will think, oh, it is them coming again, it's a revenue driver. It may be, some of those things. But you see, the primary thing is, how do we make this city one that Lagosians will be proud of? You get my point? Yes. So on their own part, is to continue to inform people. It is just to bombard people so that people are a lot more aware. People can also, in turn, demand from developers. Like I said, the average buyer is sophisticated. What title is it? Where's the building plan approval? Then you need to be, where's your layout approval? So all of these now, it is now people who now deliberately flout all these regulations, and also investors that choose to remain ignorant that will face the brunt of the law when it comes.
Okay, so for investors, I would love for you to give an A to Z of the kind of questions, approvals they should ask. Like, I want to buy this property, because before now, nobody was going to ask you for layout approval.
Correct.
So it's like, as they are knowing about one, another one is coming out again.
What other thing can be pulled out of this man?
So for us here on Square Meter Stories,
yes,
is it possible to list out, I'm buying a property from a developer, A to Z of the kind of approvals I should be asking if he has, and even the documents? Give me the documents, let me see. A to Z, so that tomorrow I don't hear the government is coming out with a new one that is not really new, and then I add it to my portfolio of questions to ask. So
a caveat here, right, is I would advise first and foremost to work with a professional. Get a property lawyer, get somebody who is very, very seasoned in this industry to guide you, because what we're about to say isn't a foolproof list. And what I mean by that is that you don't say, oh, I heard some people say this particular thing, and then it's because of this that I complied with what he said, and then I was still caught flat-footed. No, but you must ensure you work with somebody to guide you through, because the way you go about a residential investment is different from a commercial investment. Say you were buying a mall or you were buying a shop or something. There are different nuances to this thing, and you must seek guidance from those who know it. But then again, you come into a property, The very first thing you want to know, what is the title? Because that is the basis for which any development can even be legal to begin with. If there are issues surrounding or it is kind of cloudy, that, okay, you don't know the root title, you can't trace it, or maybe the developer is not forthcoming with the document or availing you what you should check, then you should be very, very mindful. The second is, of course, if it's within a large tract of land, then you ask, do you have a layout approval? Again, the person who is guiding you would also walk you through these things. Another thing again is that you also want to check, right, if the development is sited around any major water or drainage body. You want to ask, do you have your drainage clearance? A drainage clearance is to ensure that tomorrow they won't say a canal is passing through here. See that canal that you saw there? This is actually how it's supposed to go. Or you see whatever, this is how it's supposed to go. You need to also be mindful of that. Then again, you also want to ask your building plan approval. Do you have it? And the reason for that is because a lot of people will just develop and they will say, we will tackle these issues as it goes. When they come, we will settle them. But no, the danger in that is your building is already up. And then that particular building itself does not in any way comply with what was approved, because a building can have an approval, but a lot of people don't build what was approved.
Yes.
They do not. You will see the building plan approval, and what they have already erected is something different. So you also want to be very, very guided. It's not that it just has a building plan approval. Can I see it? When you see it, and then what is being built conforms with it, then you're fine. Or you can as well also hold developer accountable. As he's building and you're seeing something different, you should be wary. You should be wary. You know, because when you actually give somebody money, you are holding that person accountable to doing the things that you have already done your checks on. Again, never go at it alone. Like I said, do not say, oh, because we said this. Then again, after you have invested, check for your stage compliance certificates. What does that do? Because it doesn't end there. You continue to guard your investment all through to completion. Your stage compliance certificates ensures that the developer in question is building in accordance to standards. You know, because particularly for your reinforcement bars, you don't want to say, oh, this particular thing has an approval and then it collapsed. Because then what happens to your investment? And there are very sad and sobering tales of people who have lost investments in that sense, you know, not to mention names. But you also want to ensure that you guide that. Then when you are done with the construction, you ask again, your certificate for fitness and habitation, where is it? Because the building may be done up and completed, and then you are just coming to that property, you see a finished structure, you love it, you want to buy it. You ask, your certificate of fitness and habitation, where do you have? Because even after it has approval, even after it has your stage certification certificates, you can still come and see an X there. And you'll be wondering, but I have all these things, I did all my checks. There's still something called a certificate for fitness and habitation. You must also ensure the developer obtains that. These are the things, I mean, some of the things, not a foolproof list, but some of the things that you need to be guided on when making that investment.
Thank you very much. So before I take you to the last question, I'm going to drag you into something a bit.
Okay.
Because you said, get the advice of a property lawyer.
Yes.
Is every lawyer in Nigeria a property lawyer?
No. Don't finish the question. No. Be careful. The answer to that question is no.
Let me tell you why. Because I have had situations.
Very guided.
Oh boy, I've had situations where a client comes, oh, they want to get this property, they want to get that property, and you guide them. Right? Now, I'm not a lawyer, but years of experience, I know certain things.
Yes.
And you try to guide them, and then they tell you, my lawyer said this, and you're like, you know, you are trying to be polite, so you don't want to tell them, this your lawyer doesn't know anything.
Doesn't know jack.
Doesn't know jack.
Yes.
You know, but I think it needs to be emphasized to people.
Yes.
Find out if the lawyer you are engaging, yes, he's your friend. Yeah, because that's usually
or your brother.
He's your brother. Yes, done, okay, he has been handling cases for you before. But he's not a property lawyer. Because when it comes to searching documents, titles, digging into properties, I found out that quite a number of lawyers from clients that have come my way don't know what they are doing. And so they advise the client wrongly.
Yes.
So I wanted to drag you to that is every lawyer a property lawyer? And is it necessary for for investors in the real estate sector to ask the lawyer they are asking to help them in property transactions, come, are you a property lawyer?
Okay, this is a very sobering question. I'll try not to. Whatever I say is not supposed to be comical. It's very serious. Okay, and that's that. You see, the fees that you do not pay in part, right? And that in part is that when you enter into a transaction, there are certain fees that you will have to pay. Your agency fee, to whoever it is who is your agent or your realtor guiding you through the property, and then your legal fee, the person who stands in as your lawyer. Some people like to shortcut that whole thing. They want to do it themselves to save that 10%. So the fees that you avoid paying in part, you pay in full later at the cost of that property. And I say this with a lot of sobriety. Now, the thing is that not every lawyer can represent you when it comes to a real estate transaction. Can every doctor operate you? Please, if you can answer that question, if you go to a generalist, right, and you say, okay, doctor, I have this thing, although it's a benign kind of pain or ache, please treat it. And the doctor says, don't worry, you just come and then I'll cut you open. Won't you be, you would question that now, and the person will refer and say, okay, go to this person. So to be very ethical, okay, to say, you know what, I do not have experience in this field, I will bring somebody in on this who we can work with. And then if it's to also protect your interests, I mean, legal matters, I won't go into that, whether it is also possible or whatever it is, or whether how that works, referrals. But a property lawyer would guide you directly about it. And then if you want to know if this lawyer is competent enough, you could ask, oh, what transactions have you done in times past, or how have you guided people in times past? If you are somebody who doesn't know anyone, you also want to be very, very careful about that. I've seen certain people who've come to me for advice and they say, oh, okay, this is very recently, we're having a guest on, I think in another few weeks to talk about contracts in properties from a very new angle. And what happened was that I saw this particular contract of sale, okay, and I read it, and it was at the point when this particular client was to pay, not our property, of course, but just so people approach you and say, okay, what do you think? What do you think? And I said, okay, let me take a look at the contract of sale. You've done your checks and just let me look at the contract of sale. And my mouth just kept dropping and dropping as I read it. And I said, who read it? He said, our lawyer has gone through it. Your lawyer has gone through it. Your lawyer going through it is some people, I don't know, because for the lack of words to say, I don't know how a person will look at a document that has gaping loopholes in it. But because the person is not trained property-wise, okay, and will now say he has done all his own checks. And maybe a lawyer will just be checking, okay, maybe this clause is there, that clause is there, whatever. But it takes a proper lawyer to know the nuances of what can actually protect his own client. And I said, you're walking into a trap. Guess what? I never heard back from that person. But it's my guess that that person bought that property. And I'm sure in another 6 months, the person will come back to me to say it is automatic. I don't care what happens. But that person is certainly coming back to me with tales of woe. I can guarantee if the person went ahead with it. What I'm just saying in essence is not every lawyer is a property lawyer. Get yourself a sound property lawyer. Pay the fees. Please. Pay it. Because it will save you the headache. Again, what you don't pay for in part, you pay for in full when it eventually happens. With interest in so many cases. So that's the answer to your question.
I'm sure because you shared that document with me. Now, it's not our topic for today.
Not for today. No, we are going to dive deep into that. But because
that document was
yourself,
wild.
you are not even a property lawyer. I'm not a property lawyer. But of course, you are very seasoned in the industry. And you could see how this person was walking into.
It was a trap.
No, you're walking into a trap with your eyes wide open, not even blindfolded. So these are some of the things that we see.
Well, we'll get into that. So, final word.
Yes.
Back to our topic for today at the 176 illegal estates.
Yes.
This directive. Final words is a step in the right direction. It brings sanity to the industry.
Yes.
And it more or less exposes investors into the kind of extra questions they should ask.
Absolutely.
Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Right. So, thank you very much, Architect Olamido, for
pleasure.
your knowledge and for answering our questions. But for people out there who have more questions to ask, feel free to send us an email, send us a message, and we would answer to the best of our abilities. And if need be, probably refer you to other experts that can help you out. So thank you. This has been Square Meter Stories. Once again, we appeal to you. Do not get into any property transaction without professional guidance. It's a plea because wild things are happening in the industry. If you love this episode of Square Meter Stories and you love our content, do like, share, leave a comment, and introduce us to other people who would also enjoy this content to help make the industry a saner one for each and every one of us. Till we see you again next time, I'm Isi Edagese, and this has been Square Meter Stories.
God bless.